Andrei, I have friends who worry about me because I'm so analytical about the approach to God and religion, and they tell me I must have faith. How do you differentiate faith from belief? What is faith? I know what belief is.
Right. I take it that faith is, while it's cognitive, is something that is in many respects quite different from belief. So I take it that belief is going to be something that is shaped by evidence. Some people will describe that as being directed at the truth. And it's not the sort of thing that we can take up voluntarily. And I think in part because of the way that it's shaped by the evidence that we have for a particular claim. Faith, on the other hand, I take to be a form of accepting something is true. And by acceptance, what I mean is a sort of cognitive state that is largely shaped by, in this case, our practical interests at a particular time. That's not to say that acceptance is wholly unresponsive to the evidence that a person might have. If you will, acceptance might come in degrees. Faith, I take it, is going to be a way of acceptance that is going to be relatively strong, but it's not going to be as far as belief. In fact, I would say that in the case of faith, what it's going to be is it's going to be involving contra John Bishop, who talks about faith being what he calls a doxastic venture, or if you will, a belief venture. It's a non-doxastic venture. It involves acceptance on the part of an agent. And I think that faith is typically going to be called for, and when it's going to be most appropriate, if you will, and rational, is going to be at times when a person's evidence makes the options, let's say between a particular set of religious doctrines, and rejecting religious doctrines, makes it sort of 50-50, if you will, right?
When you say a faith makes it rational, it would seem to me that the whole definition of faith is, if not irrational, certainly non-rational.
Right.
It seems like you can never make faith rational because then it's not faith.
No, but I think in this sort of case, I think we have to be careful about what we mean by rationality in this case. I think what we might want to be thinking about here is not so much epistemic rationality or rationality as it relates to the the goal of achieving knowledge, but in this case, it's more of a sort of broad rationality. In this case, what we're thinking about here now is what it means for you to be a rational agent, and what would be a rational sort of commitment for you to have in the light of the evidence. And I take it that in the kinds of cases where acceptance, and the kind of acceptance that's going to count as faith, when it's going to be rational, is in cases where, if you will, the evidence makes the likelihood of a particular religious claim roughly 50-50.
Why, in some cases, is faith so elevated in the religious tradition, particularly in Christianity, to where it is at such a high level that it is almost the highest virtue in contradistinction to evidence? It's not 50-50. It's 99-1 or 100.
Yeah, and I think in those sorts of cases, the faith on the part of an agent is not going to be counting as rational. So I don't take it that somebody can only accept in the way that's going to be relevant for counting as faith in cases where it ends up being 50-50. I think that, again, faith just involves this sort of commitment, and it involves a sort of commitment in the face of not having decisive evidence in favor of a particular claim. And again, this isn't going to be unique to religious faith. I think it's going to be true of faith in general, faith that I might have that my spouse is, in fact, faithful to me. Right? So I think it can allow for a spectrum of degrees, if you will, to which somebody's faith may be rational. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that in some cases we do tend to think of somebody who has childlike faith as being somebody who is particularly virtuous.
I'm not sure if that's virtuous.
Yeah, as a philosopher, I have a hard time seeing exactly what would make that virtuous. And then when I think about that sort of claim as it's made within a particular religious tradition, most specifically Christianity, I think it's challenging to make sense of that, especially if we are concerned with faith being something that is going to be rational.
And do you think faith has to be rational in order to be legitimate?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't think it has to be rational in order for a person to have it, but at the same time, I think that ideally it's going to be rational. It shouldn't be in the face of a complete lack of evidence.
So you see then faith as a spectrum, if
Yes.
you will, that if you have absolutely no evidence or contra-evidence, in that case, faith is clearly not rational and inappropriate. I don't want to put words in your mouth. And as you go along this spectrum and it's getting to 50-50, then faith can have a rationality, even though it's certainly not belief.
Right, and again, we have to be careful here. The kind of rationality when we get to the 50-50 mark, if you will, is not going to be one that we could, let's say is rational in the sense that's going to be requisite for us to say that you're on your way to knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
You're not quite there. But you as a person, I think, are in fact accepting the proposition reasonably when you have faith, when it's at that level. But when you have it at the level where the point of where the evidence is approximating zero, I would say you're irrational or irrational at best.
In the religious traditions in which you live, do you have faith?
I think I do.
Yeah. That means there are certain things that you commit to that you do not believe for sure.
Yes, yeah. So in one sense, I suppose you could describe me as an agnostic of sorts, but I think to the extent that I have faith, and I thereby accept certain sorts of claims as true, I would count as a person of faith. So but the degree to which my faith ends up being more or less rational, that's, of course I want to think that I'm rational. Whether or not I am is another matter altogether.